Now the Jesuits were suppressed in 1773, and it means to be said whether they were suppressed truthfully or did they mastermind their own demise, because it began with the Portuguese. The Portuguese were very angry that the Jesuits were sending their profits from their Paraguayan reductions to the high Jesuit families in Italy rather than to the Portuguese government. And Lorenzo Ricci, the head of the Jesuit Order, actually testified against his fellow Jesuits in a court case in Portugal that led to the suppression of the Jesuits in that nation. Now, why would Lorenzo Ricci do that, unless it was part of a plan? Was the Jesuit suppression masterminded by the Jesuits themselves? Indeed, after Portugal had suppressed the Jesuits, a domino effect began. Spain suppressed the Jesuits, France suppressed the Jesuits, Austria suppressed the Jesuits, and eventually in 1773 the Papacy suppressed the Jesuits. So it's important that within a year of having suppressed the Jesuits, Pope Clement XIV was poisoned, seemingly by the Jesuits. So that would give evidence to the Jesuits not having masterminded their demise, but perhaps they wished to create an impression that they had been suppressed without purpose, that they hadn't masterminded their own demise. This is why they killed Pope Clement XIV, to cover up the fact that they had masterminded their own demise. The reasons why I believe they may have masterminded their own demise is by looking at their activities during their suppression. Their suppression lasted from 1773 to 1814. What did the Jesuits do during this time? Firstly, they destroyed France as a world power. Secondly, they colonized Britain. Thirdly, they took over the Papacy. They also created the Bavarian Illuminati in 1776. It was decreed by Lorenzo Ricci and set up by Adam Weishaupt, who was a Jesuit professor of Catholic canon law at a Jesuit university in Ingolstadt, a Jesuit city in a Jesuit-dominated area of Bavaria, in what is now modern Germany. And they created the Illuminati as a front by which they could act, but the Illuminati wasn't merely simply Jesuitical. It incorporated technocratic elements and indeed allied itself with the House of Rothschild. The reason that the Jesuit Order sought an alliance with the banking dynasty of the Rothschilds was because since their suppression, they could not put their money in Catholic banks because it would be most probably stolen by the Vatican. Thus, they had to use a non-Catholic bank, and the Rothschilds were perfect for the job. And indeed, during their period of suppression, the Jesuits attacked the Catholic Church. They began with the French Revolution and attacked the Catholic Church there, and everybody thought that the Jesuits were an ultra-Catholic order, but no, by this point they were proving that they were a rogue element, and always had been a rogue element. They had been the confessors of monarchs, they had been the murderers of monarchs. They had just done what they pleased. They began as a papal counter-Reformation group, but they did as they pleased from 1600 onward. And by the 1770s, by the time they were suppressed, they were out of control and very wealthy because of the reductions. And during their suppression, they strangled the Catholic Church so they could no longer collect tithes, and imprisoned the Pope. So Pope Pius VII was forced to restore the Jesuits in 1814, and was forced to relinquish the Papacy to the Jesuits. Thus, the Jesuits have controlled the Papacy ever since 1814. Every Pope, from Pius VII onward, has been a Jesuit puppet. And indeed, for their troubles, for their loyalty, the Rothschild dynasty were given the title of Treasurers of the Vatican in 1823, as a reward for their services rendered to the Jesuit Order and the Jesuit asset, the Bavarian Illuminati. Indeed, it was the Bavarian Illuminati, the Jesuit asset, who organized the most extreme elements of the French Revolution. The Jacobins were direct Illuminati assets, and the bloodbath of the French Revolution was initiated by the Illuminati and therefore by the Jesuits. in coordination with the head of British intelligence, Lord Shelburne, who was himself a Jesuit. And most of the events of the French Revolution were dictated from Beaufort House, dictated unto the Freemasons, Grand Orient Freemasonry, and the Illuminati groups within France. Their orders were dictated from Beaufort House, where Jeremy Bentham and several Jesuits were resident. Due to the Jesuit suppression, about 15,000 of them ended up in Britain, and it was those 15,000 that utilised the warrens of tunnels that I've spoken about in previous chats, and it was they who colonised Britain. Perhaps a quarter of the nobility, third of the nobility, tried to fight against the Jesuit colonisation, but they were overrun by those who supported the colonisation, mainly Catholic dynasties, but also various Protestant dynasties with links to the Jesuits, such as the Cecils. And then there were the area that sat on the fence. They didn't mind either way it went. But the Jesuits managed to get a stranglehold around King George III quite early, so King George III became a Jesuit puppet. And indeed, him being a Jesuit puppet is merely a continuation of the 1215 concessions of King John to Pope Innocent III, whereby the British throne, monarchy and crown corporation would be controlled by the papacy. Thus, King George III, the Jesuit stranglehold of King George III, was legitimized by the 1215 concessions, just as was their takeover of Britain. They legitimized it by the fact that they were now the strongest force in the papacy, and that the initial concessions of Britain belonging to Britain being a papal fiefdom was translated as now Britain was a Jesuit fiefdom for all time. So the French Revolution was interesting because the Jesuits directed the atheistic / grand architect worshipping Grand Orient Freemason groups and the Jacobins to attack the Catholic Church. People were thinking, why? The Jesuits are an ultra-Catholic order. Why would they attack the Catholic Church? They were never an ultra-Catholic order. They were always operating rogue. What were they before? They were the Alumbrados. They were the original Illuminati. And what did they term themselves in after their suppression in 1776? They termed themselves the Illuminati again. They were a rogue force. Despite their activities of counter-Reformation, they only joined in with because there were certain groups that they could not allow to rise up. They didn't want too much Protestantism or too much humanism or too much liberalism. Because with too much Protestantism, humanism or liberalism, the Alumbrados / Jesuits could never achieve their goal of world domination, because their idea of world domination was feudal, just as that of Abbot Joachim of Fiore, who wished to return everything to the primitive Catholicism of the 5th and 6th centuries. It was a tight feudal order. That was the only way they believed they could rule the earth. And indeed we are seeing the Jesuit Illuminati feudal idea being propounded onto society now in the form of corporations. The corporations, it's a form of corporate-Fascism, whereby you're now enslaved by corporations that are themselves patronized by the oligarchy. And feudalism has returned completely. You cannot rise out of your position. It's very difficult for you to move from town to town. It's very difficult for you to move from occupation to occupation. This is the edicts of feudalism that were initially enshrined by Diocletian as the Roman Empire was falling, and Constantine not long later afterwards, during the fall of the Roman Empire, when he brought Christianity into the mix as well as feudalism. And indeed Roman Catholicism and feudalism seem to go together very well. That's why the ultra-aristocracy and the Jesuits keep the Vatican. Even though they are in complete control of the Vatican, they keep it as a vanguard just in case they need it. Because they know that their ideal system needs a hierarchy which is quite similar to the papacy. So they keep the Vatican as it is. And indeed, of course, they need the figure of the White Pope to legitimize the occupation of Britain and the colonization of Britain. They need the White Pope because of the concessions of 1213 and 1215 to the Papacy. The Pope is just the puppet. It's the Black Pope ruling, but the concession state to the Pope. And it means the White Pope, the figurehead Pope that you can see. Thus, they must keep that Pope there. Even if they would like to abolish the position of the White Pope. Pope Francis is the current White Pope. Interestingly, he is a Jesuit. But I expect the Black Papacy around Arturo Sosa S.J. and the other Jesuits would love to just be rid of the White Pope position, but to keep their power over the fiefdoms of the United Kingdom and America, they must keep the White Pope in position. And indeed, they just simply use him as a mouthpiece. They say the White Pope just recites whatever the Black Pope and the Jesuits tell him to recite. Interestingly, the Jesuits also managed to get a bill of papal infallibility passed in 1870, knowing that they could use the White Pope as a mouthpiece, and whatever he said was infallible, so everybody had to believe it. But it was actually what the Jesuits were telling him to say that he was spurting out. So it's not truly papal infallibility, it's merely Jesuit trickery. But it's very clever Jesuit trickery. And still, you know, people would say, Jesuits, what? No, they've got nothing to do with the New World Order. It's all the Rothschilds, it's the Zionists, it's... Indeed, that there are Rothschild and Zionist influences within the New World Order, but they are not the kingpins of the conspiratorial world. It's the Jesuits that you need to start researching. Indeed, it's no surprise that there is only a handful of us who debate this. And unfortunately, majority of my kindred who are studying this kind of conspiratorial area are Protestant preachers, and I believe that by being Protestants they remain within the Romanoid sphere. So I would love to have them rise out of the darkness, because Protestantism is nothing more than a bastard child of Rome, especially Lutheranism. But you had someone like Munzer. He was much more extreme. He was an anarchist version of a Christian, really. But unfortunately, we're lumbered with Luther, and Luther decided to stick with the feudal system and ally with the feudal princes against the peasants' rebellion. So Luther is no friend of ours. He's a feudalist. And the feudal system is the system that must be broken, because it's simply going to get more and more extreme. And we're seeing what's really backing and keeping the feudal system going and forcing the feudal system on us is the ever-growing police state. The police state is growing more omnipotent, more dangerous, and more uncontained. Indeed, the police now pretty much do what they want. We're 1 or 2 false flag attacks away from complete militarization of the police. But we live in the middle of the countryside. We can see police walking around with guns. I mean, this is ridiculous. But this is the way society is going. And as I was talking about before, our society glamorizes drug dealers, then stigmatizes drug users. I don't understand that concept. But, you know, it's okay for a guy to run around selling cocaine, but the minute somebody takes a pipe of crack, which I mean is just pretty much that cocaine washed down with ammonia or bicarbonate of soda, they're immediately the skankiest person on earth. So it doesn't make sense. It's not fair either. We're just pushed to the bottom of society, and especially as schizophrenics. Can't tell anyone that you're schizophrenic, because if you do, their body language changes and they think you're about to attack them. But so be it. The most intelligent people I know are schizoids. As I've stated, all of the prophets of this society are in the asylums. We are entering an age of high feudalism, total feudalism, being re-implemented. But then you could argue that in Britain feudalism never really went away. Even with the rise of the Industrial Revolution, it was still a form of feudalism. And with corporatism is nothing more than, you know, feudalism and fascism mixed together, really. And now we're experiencing that same system plus a communist style police state, and it's just to push the people down. So it's feudalism more and more. But anyway, you know, it's pointless. I'm making these 15-minute videos, but nobody wants to listen to me. There's too much stigma surrounding me. The schizophrenic, crackhead, mother-biting junkie. Who's gonna listen to him? Psych ward patient, you know? But I don't really care. You can call me what you like. I feel like this is everything that's right for me to continue on this path. And indeed it is best. All you really need to understand is the concessions of King John to really understand the system that is going on now. Because we're not seeing an openly ultra-Catholic system. Despite the fact that it's the Jesuits are ruling, and this has proven my point, the Jesuits aren't actually Catholic at all. They were merely using the Catholic Church as a vessel on their own trip towards world domination. Now they operate through surveillance, through corporations, and through a police state. In many senses you could say that the police state is the modern equivalent of the Inquisition, or that the psychiatrists are the modern inquisitors. Basically, it is a Roman structure, but a technocratic version of a Roman structure. And I believe the eventual outcome is global reductions, but whether they take a wholly agrarian or more technocratic shape, I do not know. And I guess we'll just have to wait and see. And for now, we just descend further into the darkness. Now I'm going to fade out. Have a coffee.